right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Virtru's Hash It Out webinar here. I'm Shannon Vaughn. I'm the GM of Virtru's Federal Practice. And today's guest on Hash It Out is Brian Platz, the co-founder and CEO of Fluree, a linked data platform based in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Brian, thanks for hopping on here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shannon. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool, actually. So a little background on kind of how we got here. We were down in San Antonio, Texas this past December, and we're at the DOTIS Worldwide Conference. So that's the Defense Intelligence Agency's big, annual conference. And I'm walking around, checking out the floor, and there's all these vendors and doing all the cool, defense and intelligence work. And you got your Humvees, and you got your big demo screens, you got your satellites, and then you got a couple companies just talking about nerdy data stuff. And I saw your guys' booth, and I just had to walk over. So it was probably the only other company kind of pitching what we were pitching, which is around data-centric security. And had a cool, kind of vibe and everything else, but it was data-centric security. And the only other time I could actually remember that was earlier, probably a couple months before that. We were in Mons, Belgium at a NATO conference, I think last October or so. And probably 60% of the companies in Europe are talking about data-centric security. And in the United States, we're kind of talking about zero trust, right? That's kind of our equivalent buzzword. But finally, somebody else was talking about data-centric security. So I just loved it because I think this is one area where the Europeans might actually be out ahead of the Americans, thanks to things like GDPR and others like that. So really great to have you on here. Thanks to your team for putting up that great booth and making the introductions there. So, well, first, I want to ask you, give us a little background on Fluree and kind of the impetus to create the company.
Yeah. So I've been in enterprise software my whole career, which is getting closer to, I think, 30 years than 20 years at this point. So quite some time. And one of the things we see a major shift around is sort of the flipping of the world, sometimes we refer it to, which is everyone has for, probably as long as I've been alive, gone out and bought apps. And then those apps sort of have data that's stuck behind them. And of course, that's part of our data silo problem is we just go and buy apps. And that the apps are being, more commoditized now. The value they hold is decreasing, and where the value is actually coming from is the data that's kind of locked up behind them. And this world that hopefully we'll see in my lifetime, which is you actually don't buy apps and manage apps, you manage strategic data. And the apps come to the data as opposed to you sending your data to the app. So, the data itself, ultimately, I think is what wins and where the value comes from. So as you know, databases were designed to sit behind apps, and there's not data platforms that are designed to sort of be this strategic repository. And that's what we built Fluree around is towards that vision.
So yeah, dive into that a little bit for me. Described you in the opening as a linked data platform, and I think that's a really kind of cool way to think about it. Why would you say you guys describe yourselves as kind of linked data platform in that context?
Yeah, I mean, you think about kind of what we need to do. So if you are trying to get value out of data today, you're probably at worst writing a bunch of custom scripts and, doing this on some data analyst laptop in a Jupyter notebook or something. At best, maybe you're putting it into a data warehouse or data lake, which is really you're copying and pasting data silos and, putting them there, which is better, potentially, but it still doesn't get around this problem of we cannot scale data by copying and pasting it. We lose security when we do that. We lose recency. The data's stale as soon as you do it. We need to buy a lot of hard drives. Luckily that's getting cheaper. But if we're going to store everything and duplicate it and duplicate it and duplicate it, so the linked data notion is all about if we can leave data in place, have it sit, where it sits. but have machines be able to decipher what that data means without humans, and have ways of connecting the data together virtually as though it was all together. Ultimately, that's the long-term solution. So we lean really heavily into the set of linked data standards that do exactly this. You know, we have the web for humans, and we have web pages that can link to other web pages. This is the same thing for data, but it's for machines, and it's data that can link to other data that's sitting in other places. And ultimately, we create this huge virtual web of data by sitting on these W3C standards that embrace that. So that's when we say linked data, we're really very specifically meaning the linked data standards that sit in the W3C that enable this sort of thing.
So very much decentralized blockchain, you know, kind of those core tenets of Web3.
Yeah, core tenets of Web3, but you know, blockchain, I think, well, has some bad press lately, for sure. But the you know, blockchain comes in that it can add a characteristic to that data only if it's important. Sometimes it's not important. What it can add is a verifiable provenance or verifiable history that can be proven how things can change. You know, sometimes you might have data where you don't care about that, so there's no reason to sort of go through that expense of it. You know, these are all different sort of features and capabilities that can sit around data that has this capability. Sometimes you'll want it, sometimes you don't. And it's always been our focus of, you know, grab the things that are important for your use case. If verifiability and traceability and cryptographic proofs are really critical for what you happen to be working with, you know, blockchains provided a pretty good pattern for how to do that. There's probably other ways too, but if you don't need that, turn it off. You don't need it.
Yeah, you remind me of actually one of our projects was for one of the large U.S. combatant commands, and this goes back a few years, and we're still working on the project. But in the beginning, they kind of called it network collapse, because talk about redundancy of data. You know, when you work with coalition partners, what they were doing is they would stand up a new network. So, you know, US and country X, that's one network. US and country X and country Y is another network. And they might have to make 3 copies of that data. And then you get into the things you're talking about, right? Whether you have old, stale data, whether you have wrong data, whether you have data that nobody should be accessing anymore. And so you run into this problem set. And so we basically collapsed nearly, you know, 24 networks down to a single network that everybody was kind of federated into, kind of this decentralized concept, and say, let's have a single gold copy that can sit in country X and country Y and the US, and we can all call to those things and know that that is the right copy of the data. So
yeah, and you know, it sounds crazy. It is crazy, but it's kind of like what we have. Those are the tools we have, right? So that's why people do them. That's the tools we have. And I think that part of it is we need better tools so we don't have to do that. And I think the really impactful part of what you just said too is each time you're making those copies, you know, the security that surrounds that data typically sits in the application. Well, you didn't copy the application, you just copied the data, which means you lost the security. So this idea of data needing to carry policy and security with it in the data tier, I think is a really important component of this to enable this capability.
I think that is exactly right. I think one of the other things our companies both really believe in is, you know, open source and open standards, right? So one of those kind of open standards for us is the trusted data format, right? It's the basis of a lot of our tech. Our co-founder, CTO, was lead author on it when he was up at NSA, but it's open source. It's maintained by ODNI today, but others, you know, whether they're in DoD IC or, you know, international companies are using trusted data format as a way to do that. And then what we've done is kind of taken that and built in transformers, right? Translation tools, I say glue, to work with other standards. So you mentioned, you know, kind of crypto binding, right? Metadata tagging, crypto binding. Those are 2 NATO standards, 4774 and 4778. Well, we kind of built that into our version of TDF to be able to say, as long as you subscribe to an open standard, you can, we can understand that thing. So however, say the Brits, they tag a data a certain way, but they subscribe to that NATO standard, the US can actually accept that, and nobody has to go back and re-tag data or make another copy or use somebody else's tagging tools, right? Like little things like that can go a long way. But I'd love to hear why you guys, are big on, proponents of open source and kind of standards-based tech.
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate way this works is if machines can automatically interoperate or sort of crawl the data web, if you will, to get the information that they need. And, that whole premise relies on concepts of decentralization. I don't control all the data web. I control just nodes in it. And if we don't have standards, then, we're kind of back in the situation that we have right now, which again is solvable. It's just not scalable, and it's solvable by hiring a lot of data analysts to write a lot of custom scripts to try to translate format A to format B to format C. They could also use some better tools, because the other thing that's happening to them is that a lot of the analysts are duplicating each other's work just because they don't have great ways of sort of managing that workflow. So I think we're going to see more in that area as well that helps with it. But yeah, it's not scalable without the standards. And, the idea is that you can leverage the best data in the most accurate way, in a zero trust way, in a way that zero trust is always a little strange to me, because it actually means it has the most trust, not zero trust. But I understand the term, we use the term a lot, but in a zero trust way, that's kind of where the scale happens. And I think the insights happen. And you would never get there without the standards.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's funny you mentioned zero trust, because I was kind of crawling your website. I read you guys' blogs and stuff. And one of the things you had on there was kind of top trends for data sharing in 23, which I thought was kind of cool. And I wanted to pick apart a couple of them. Because one of them is around verifiable credentials, right? And so if we look at the zero trust framework, there's pretty much good consensus on. We all agree there's at least 5, at least in the U.S. government. But there's some places that say there's 7. There's some places that say there's 8. But identity is kind of that first pillar, the user pillar, and then there's endpoints, networks, apps, and then data, like what we believe in, right? Data-centric security. But you guys talk about verifiable credentials. Why do you call out that kind of identity pillar so much as a trend in 23?
Yeah, so the credential really has 3 things. So it's got a payload, the data. Sometimes I like to think about this, if you, in sort of old school terms, you typed out a letter on your typewriter. It's got the envelope, which is what you put the letter in and seal it with, and that's where kind of your cryptographic proof sits. And then the cryptographic proof and the letter itself might be tied to a digital identity. So the identity is really kind of that third part of that verifiable credential. And it doesn't require, but it certainly embraces the DID standard, decentralized identifier standard. And it's a pretty interesting concept, because it, again, lays out some baseline standards, but allows flexibility for identity to exist anywhere. Some people, we do some work in higher ed and creating verifiable credentials for packaging up. A credential, by the way, is just like, a simplest form of passport or a driver's license are credentials. They're, of course, usually in a physical form. So this is a digital form, but the digital form allows us to have a lot more credentials. So we do a lot in higher ed, university degrees and transcripts, things like that, wrapping seals. You can think health records, you can think financial records, all being wrapped up in this sort of format. But the identity component, the decentralized identity standard allows you to say, I want to manage my identity on a blockchain, or I just want to manage it on my laptop. In that space, a lot of people are using GitHub to manage their identity. So it offers this really flexible way where people can sort of store and manage their identity wherever they want. And then other entities can sort of wrap provable information around your identity. So that's one of the reasons we really like that. It's a standard. It sort of embraces that inherent flexibility. but still gives us a way of creating linked data that's provable.
That's great. It's funny, you mentioned the healthcare space, and while I run federal, we've got some large healthcare clients, CDC and others. But if you ask across Virtru's 8,000 customers or so, I think our three largest sectors are people with sensitive data. And guess who those are? Healthcare, finance, and the governments, right? People that have data that they believe to be sensitive. In healthcare, that's a PII or something tied to some, personal identifiable information, right? So it's funny how much we probably have very similar customer bases. I was looking on your website actually, and two of the logos that you guys put up there are DoD and Air Force. Do you have a good kind of I'll say case study on kind of why they came to you, given that they're a government customer that probably has sensitive data?
Yeah, I mean, this is gets back to my I think kind of upfront dialogue, is that there's an increased emphasis on the strategic importance of data and data science, within the DoD, and I think for them they see competitive pressure, if you call it, from other large countries. And of course, they want to be on the leading edge of that. And, as anyone who's kind of been in the inside of those organizations, sometimes it's really hard to get your hands on the data you need to do your job. And so there's kind of this congressional mandate that came out several years ago where they were going to swap their data policy from need to know, which kind of makes sense in those environments, to need to share. So you actually have an obligation to share your data, not to protect your data. Well, in a protected way, obviously, a highly protected way, but you're obligated to make sure that data can get into the hands of the people who are authorized to have it, which is a complete 180 shift in that. And, to accomplish that, I mean, it needs all of these things we're talking about. How can I trust the data? How can I, wrap policy and protection around the data at a granular level? So all these kind of challenges exist in that exact environment where they're trying to shift their data strategy to in the DoD. So we think there's an immense amount of applicability there, and just tremendous number of projects that could use this sort of philosophy.
Yeah, actually, one of the ones that also came up on the 23 trends you guys were talking about, multi-party compute, right? Secure multi-party compute, and we've got a project there, kind of around secure analytics, clean room style things. Amazon's put out a clean room product. Kind of the funny thing there is everybody has to be an Amazon customer. Their data has to sit in an S3 bucket. You can only have up to 5 parties. Couple downsides there. But I'd love to hear why you guys, are looking at the MPC space, and how do you see that as a trend going forward?
Yeah, I think it's just an extension, a pretty far extension of what we've talked about, which is you want data to be exchanged, but really, why do you want that data to be able to be exchanged? To those who have permission, and the policy allows you to. It's because you want to get insights, right? You're probably doing analytics or something on top of it. So what if you take that to an extreme and you say, well, I want to be able to do analytics, but I can't even see a single piece of the data, like it's that protected. That's where this technology comes in. Yeah, and it's and it's an exciting. I mean, it's been around for a while. I first learned about it at really a government-related conference many years ago, but it was from a professor who had been working on it at Stanford for like 12 years. I mean, it wasn't like anything new, but it is sort of new in how it's emerging right now. But it's sort of a field of kind of this class of zero knowledge cryptography. But it's really cool. I mean, you can do analytics, across data you can't see, and have accurate results and never disclose anything. How it focuses, how does that tie into us? So, when you're doing analytics, you have to do it in a non-identifiable way. So even if you shield the record, if you allow the analytics to get granular enough, you can still sort of figure out who they're talking about, right? So everything kind of needs to get up aggregated into higher level buckets to allow those analytics to appear. We are a knowledge graph database, which means we create hierarchies or taxonomies out of data. And so for us, it's a very natural approach because you just need to pick the level and the hierarchy of your sort of data classification where it's generic enough, you know you won't accidentally leak any identifiable information. So it's a real natural extension for how we manage data.
Yeah, you got to be able to build the trust with that data owner, right? And they're not going to share into a clean room or some ephemeral store to allow somebody to do kind of anonymous, whatever the thing is, analytic or whatever they're trying to run. And they want to be able to, have control over that. So, one of the things we talk about is, you could have, 100 parties share something in, say we're, all trying to, cure COVID. Well, if there's a derivative data set that comes from that, all of those original data owners should have, some portion, at least maintain ownership of their data if there is a derivative data set that everybody buys into. In the unfortunate space where, maybe that company goes off and makes a ton of money through acquisition, well, their new owners might not want that data in there, and they should be able to revoke access, right? And so that's how you build that verifiable trust to allow people to do multi-party compute and incentivize them to do it, right? That's one thing I just really like. Next one I want to chat on here, because you guys had a good quote that I'll read. It said, 2023, more than ever, the focus will be on access control, advanced encryption, and transparency, and where your data is going, when, and to whom. And I love that line, right? Because that's everything we believe, right? Advanced, smart access control decisions, advanced encryption. We do optional encryption, but for a lot of our sensitive customers, they want that encryption piece, but also transparency, right? So we like to say, make the data owner stay the data owner, right? Like even after it's left their boundary, when their data goes externally, they should still be the data owner, right? It shouldn't be this, fail open concept of like, oh, I hope, that person doesn't do anything with my data. I sent them a very stern email. Can you talk to why you guys think, access controls, advanced encryption, transparency really are, one of those trends in 23?
I think the good example that you brought up in Europe around them being ahead of us in many ways, it's related to PII data and how they have approached regulation around it. I'm proposing that we have this global interconnected web of data, but it's a pretty complicated web, especially when you're dealing with things like that, because you even think here in the US now, you're giving a bank a consent to market, they might have auto-checked the box for you, to market to other banks that they're going to sell your data to. Well, now that data is transferring through many different channels. It might be in different banking organizations or different advertising channels. And now as a consumer, you come in and you uncheck that box. How do they crawl that data back through this entire web of usage and how it's been replicated? And we get to this idea that that's how the consent and the policy has to travel along with the data itself, so it can be recognized and actually pulled back. And I think we're just going to see more and more instances of this need.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the final one I want to kind of end on here is, one of the ones you call out is interoperability. And I think you guys speak on your website often to like semantic interoperability, right? Which I really like. On our side, our interoperability really is, kind of what I mentioned earlier around like, how do you let different countries, do the things that they already do, and you ensure an interoperability as the vendor, right? And so whether that's engaging with open standards, ensuring open platforms where possible, using open source, like doing all the things you'd expect. We do that for, like I said, the TDF specs, so whether that's the IC TDF or base TDF or nano TDF, which we do for like really, really lightweight sensors, like edge inflows, or an international kind of, mission partner interoperability to ensure that the standards that they subscribe to, we can help translate. But I'd really like to hear what you guys are talking about, data interoperability and that semantic interoperability piece.
Yeah, so we really fully embrace and are a knowledge graph database. And the knowledge graph database sits on top of the W3C standards around data interoperability. So yeah, we're very focused on the standards, and in particular, what the standards, who have had a lot of smart people thinking about this for a long time, have added a lot of richness into the data format itself. So it's not just about sort of that interoperability layer. It's how do we do things like create class hierarchies and inferencing automatically in the data tier? The thing that we're really layering even in addition to that outside of this core spec is then how do we wrap that data in the policy and enforce it? But yeah, this all comes down to our core standard support, and we lean pretty heavily into the W3C standards around this.
No, that's great. All right, well, I think that's about all I got today. I really do want to say thanks, Brian, to you and the Fluree team for hopping on here, but also for speaking a common language. So thanks for helping to push kind of those open standards, help to push that data centricity message inside the United States and elsewhere. It's great to see that there's other small companies out here really trying to make a difference. So, Brian, thanks for hopping on Hash It Out here at Virtru today.
Thanks so much, Shannon. It was a pleasure being on. Great conversation.
All right, buddy. Bye now.